Okay, we're live on YouTube. Hi, I'm Ralph Preston, and on Tuesdays we have these Stroke Buddies Recovery and Science Zoom meetings where we try and bring you some useful information for your recovery. I think today is going to be really interesting to me anyway, and based on the number of people we have here, and other people feel the same way. We've got Dr. Lynne Gauthier today, and she is a teacher at the University of Massachusetts Lowell on the faculty there, and she's the chief scientist at RxGames, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about gaming and maximizing neuroplasticity, perhaps even a long time after your stroke, because all of us in here know that neuroplasticity lasts a lifetime. So I'm not going to present, so let me turn it over to Lynn. And like I said before, you're welcome to ask questions at any time. And so here we go. Thank you, Dr. Gauthier, and for taking time out of your schedule and sharing your knowledge with us. We appreciate it. And whenever you want to go, we're ready.
Great. Thanks for inviting me, Ralph. So I love to work with the stroke community, and just a little bit of background on myself. The entire time that I've been doing research and developing things for the stroke community, it's never in a silo. So I will be showing some videos that have some stroke survivors in them, and those are folks that we engaged with in our research. So if it's something that you want to be more involved in and say, oh, I want to contribute as part of a research team, just reach out to me, because I do work with the stroke community in planning the research projects, putting together grant applications, and just making sure that what I'm doing on the academic side fits what's important to the stroke community, because I feel like we can't just do research in a silo. I can't be in a lab by myself, not engaging with the people that I'm trying to serve. So I do love to be very collaborative. It doesn't usually mean that, we're talking every week kind of thing, but it's great to have people when I'm starting a new project, like let's get everyone's opinions. We might have like a Zoom call or something like that to just brainstorm ideas. So it doesn't have to be huge commitments, but if you're interested in just keeping connected with what the lab's doing and staying, you got a little kitten in there. Just, staying involved in the research community, feel free to reach out to me after the meeting, because I do love to engage with the stroke community.
I'll just say one thing before you start, and that's if most people here know, but when we put up the edited video on YouTube, we put all of Doctor's contact information in the description under the Zoom. And one thing I would say to you is Stroke Buddies is one of the few Facebook groups that believes in studies and working with academics and um, so we allow you to post surveys, ask questions, most anything you want, because basically I feel, and I think most of us feel, we don't get what we need. And it's important for us to educate people from our side. And if you want to see change, you have to be part of that change. So that's my attitude on it, and why I like to work with researchers, scientists, and allow surveys and studies and things like that. So feel free to use the groups to gather real world information. Like you said, you don't want to live in the lab, and we're the lab. If there's any lab you want to live in, that would be us. But don't
Right.
have a
And
stroke.
not just as participants in the study either. Like I like to include stroke survivors and their families, like actually as part of the team, and in planning things, not just as, oh, I need data from you. Because I think so many researchers kind of, they come to you when they need something, right? And that's not what you want. You want a collaboration and a community. So that's one of the things I'm trying to build in my lab. I'm not always like perfect about communication because I'm very busy, but it's definitely something that when a new project starts, I try to pull people in and get folks involved in the planning part too.
I would say at least 25%, maybe 33% of our members are caregivers. I find there's a lot of caregivers that get involved in stroke groups. Often, sometimes because their partner can't, sometimes it's reinforcement, sometimes they're
Mhm.
mothers of a 16-year-old child who's unfortunately had a stroke. Anyway, we have a lot of caregivers and we need to do more with caregiving.
Yep.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, and caregivers are busy, there are a lot, there's a lot of demands on their time. All right, well, I'll get started with my presentation. And like Ralph said, if you have questions, don't hold them. They might fly out of your brain. So it's okay to just, put them in the chat or, ask as you have those questions. I don't mind being interrupted if it's really pressing and you need, and I don't want to lose you, right? I want to keep you engaged. So I'm just going to share my PowerPoint here. All right. Everybody can see that, hopefully. Let me know if you can. So today I'm going to talk about how to optimize recovery and brain plasticity. It's going to be very evidence-based, so nothing I'm saying here isn't supported by evidence. But I will also talk about my experience as a clinician and working with stroke survivors as well. So there's three evidence-backed ways, at least three, but I'm going to talk about the three that are more accessible to folks that they can do in their own home. Exercise is a big piece of neuroplasticity. Everyday habit change and use, particularly moving your body, any part of your body that's been affected by the stroke, making sure that you're using it in everyday activities. And finally, meaningful and social activities is often underappreciated, but really important when you're wanting to maintain brain health and wellness. So first, I'm going to talk about exercise. These are the scientific guidelines around exercise for stroke. So this is taken directly out of a publication. And I'll read it to you, but then I'll kind of translate into what that actually means in everyday life for a stroke survivor. So they're talking here about it's important to have, your PT and your structured exercise and potentially working with a physical personal trainer or something like that. So you have some structured, um, instructed exercise so that you know how to actually exercise with the body that you have. And then they're talking about moving into less structured, more self-directed physical activity at home or in the community. Now, does this mean you have to do it exactly that way? No. Exercise itself is medicine. So if you're moving your body, you're getting a benefit. What can help is that someone who's a professional, like a physical therapist or a personal trainer, they know how to do particular exercises to benefit different aspects of your physical training. So if you're someone who's had a stroke and it affected your upper extremity, it may be harder for you to, use exercise equipment, or it may be that you need certain exercises to help manage your spasticity. So a physical therapist, occupational therapist, maybe even a personal trainer that's neuro-based, they're going to be able to give you some more suggestions. And here are the particular exercises that you want to kind of keep up with. So like a little home practice program. But that's not all you want to do. So exercise is not just doing your PT, it's getting out there and, walking, taking your dog for a walk, and thinking about ways to make it fun. Just how important a physical activity is that if you look at the WHO's guidelines for longevity, it's one of the like top four. So healthy diet's important, physical activity, and then minimizing tobacco and alcohol or other drug use. So physical activity is right up there, super important if you want to extend your lifespan. People who are physically active live on average 4 years longer than people who aren't. And I think it's even more pronounced for stroke survivors because mobility challenges can make it harder to even get like a very low baseline physical activity. So doing exercise is just super important. And not just for your physical health, but mental health as well, concentration and brain plasticity. They've done studies on mice and rats and looked at how many new neurons their brains were producing, and they put some of the rats in a cage without really an easy way to exercise, or just a regular cage, and then they put other rats in a cage that had all sorts of mazes and exercise wheels and just kept them much more active. And the rats that were in the cage that had all that the activity, the more active rats, they were actually, I think, producing something like 3 times as many new neurons as the rats that were in the boring environment. So it's just really, really important, if you want to maintain health and wellness, to be getting physical activity. MS2. So this is where I think the discussion points can come in, because people say, oh yeah, exercise is good. We all know exercise is good for us, but I hate exercising. Or I just, how do I motivate myself to exercise? It's just really hard for me to actually get up and do it. And then when you have mobility challenges, it adds a whole level of new barriers. A lot of the exercise facilities aren't designed for people whose bodies move differently. So, how do you get there and then use the equipment that they have? That may not be accessible. So, I'm going to share some tips that have worked for folks. And then we can talk about some of the work that I've done in rehab gaming as well, to figure out, where does that fit in, and, how people have used it. So kind of what started me on this journey is that, in working with stroke survivors clinically, exercise is super important, but then we have the challenge of getting people to actually change their habits around exercise and motivate themselves to actually do exercise. The PTs are like, oh, the people just need to do their home exercise program. If they just do their home exercise program, they'll be so much better off. I'm like, well, it's not that simple, right? The home exercise program that most people get, they're probably pretty boring, right? You're just kind of sitting there and moving an object around maybe, or you're doing just like, oh, raise your arm 10 times in a row, then take a break and do it again. It's very boring. So it's really hard to adhere and motivate ourselves to do something that's boring, even if we know it's good for us. So I think one of the most important things to think about in terms of motivation is to find ways to make exercise not boring to you. People beat themselves up and say, oh, well, I just need to try harder. I just need to motivate myself more. Well, no, not really. If it's going to be boring, you're not going to be able to do that. It's just not going to work. So you have to think about, how do I change my environment? How do I change what I do day to day to make exercise a part of that and to kind of force me to do it? So you set up the environment in a way that's going to make you have to exercise more. Or you figure out ways to make it fun. Maybe it's having a buddy come and do a walk with you. Making plans with somebody. I'm going to be there and we're going to do this gym thing together. We're going to take this class together. Oh, I get a dog and now I have to walk my dog. So thinking about ways to kind of build it into what you have to do every day and to make it fun and engaging is important. And another way to do that we've done in my lab is to use gaming to deliver the home practice program. Now, I wouldn't say gaming is the be all end all and your entire solution, right? Gaming is one piece of the puzzle to make that PT part, that home exercise, like these are the 10 exercises I have to do every day to keep my mobility. These are the exercises my PT wants me to do. Gaming is really useful for that aspect of it because it makes it much more engaging. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the gaming, and then we can kind of brainstorm around other ways of getting folks to exercise. So this is what we built in my lab.
So my goal is to change the model of physical therapy practice. Rather than the therapists having to be always hands-on with the patients, we can give patients a toolbox that they can do at home to supplement what the therapist is doing, and that they're driving the bus.
I hate asking people to help me, and this gave me back the opportunity to be the way I used to be. The benefit of getting therapy at home makes it so you don't have to ask people to drive you places. You don't need to go out.
They're so fun. You know, physical therapy is hard when you're going through this, and the cardio that gets with it. And it's so much fun doing this. It's hard getting cardio. I can't run. I come in here and I work for an hour and I'm sweating when I leave. To all of a sudden lose that ability and then now be able to do something that makes me sweat. This has given me additional hope that I'll be able to get some function back.
So that just gives you an example of what the games look like. So, you know, they look like kind of Wii type games, but the difference in playing Wii and something that's designed for rehabilitation specifically is they're putting the specific exercises that they want you to do in the games themselves. So for example, we have different games like, oh, if I want to work on flexing my elbow, there's a game for that. And to make the guy go up, you flex your elbow, then the game character goes up. So it's different if you're using, we can work. I'm not saying it's not. That's a great way to get some cardio and to just move your body, and any kind of movement is good. The distinct advantage of a rehab game is that they work with folks with disabilities and working with the body that you have and then progressing the exercises as you're improving. So there's some additional features why you may want to consider a rehab specific game rather than just something like Wii or Microsoft Connect. But any of those can work. Any questions specifically about the video or what you saw or how, you know, how those games work?
I got a couple things I could add real quick. One is a couple more things about the importance of exercises. Exercise is responsible for creating all the happy chemicals, so it fights depression. And it's also responsible for helping to produce BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is miracle grow for the brain, as Dr. Hetzler describes it.
Yep.
And actually, they've done studies and found that if you exercise for half an hour before your therapy is much more effective neurologically in terms of connections. And we all, I believe, and we preach that you don't get better. The other thing about what you're doing is you don't get better 1 week, 1 hour a week at PT. Your PT should be your like piano teacher. You should do things like games and things to keep you more engaged, but you should also get exercises from your physical therapist and practice them during the week just like you would your piano lesson. And I'm here to tell you that therapists can tell you whether or not you're doing your homework, and they will treat you differently if you are.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
I am two years post-stroke, and I use a therapy game, a professional, proper therapeutic gaming system. Now, I've been using it for a year, and prior to that, I was doing rehab, but once I started the game, I can't even begin to tell you the difference it makes. It is phenomenal. So much so that I begged, because I was part of a research, I begged them to let me carry on with the game once the research was finished. So now, last week, when I've got to go once a month for assessment. Last week, when I went for the assessment this year, they are now going to increase the cost to do the game. First was $30 for the assessment. Then it was $60 a month for the assessment. And now it's going to be $80 a month. And all I do is go in, and for half an hour, they measure me. And they will adjust the game, which I could do easily, but that they won't do it. So my question is, it really works. Therapy games really work. I have been doing it for a year and I cannot begin to tell you the difference it makes. However, they always create the games, so you have to go to a physical therapist once a month, and you cannot buy the game. It's $68,000. And I want to know, is the game that you people have, because I sent an email, going to be one where you've got to go through an OT, where you've got to pay for therapy, or am I able just simply to rent the game, and how much will it cost? Because otherwise it's useless.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Our initial commercialization strategy was to work with therapists to try to keep the cost so that the patients are only paying to go to their OT or PT, and use there's actually billing codes where a therapist can get reimbursed for doing game-based remote therapeutic monitoring. And when those are pretty recent. They came out in 2022. So our initial commercialization strategy was, okay, let's take advantage of that and make it free for the patients to use the game. And then the clinics can get reimbursed through insurance to do it. The challenge with that is that model didn't really work because clinicians weren't adopting it at high enough rates to make it a sustainable strategy. So, I was very optimistic and hopeful that when those codes came out, now that there's reimbursement for it, therapists would get on board and start using it more. And it just really hasn't materialized. So we are pursuing like a direct to consumer version, like you're saying that you want. The challenge there is essentially funds. We do have a WeFunder campaign that we're running right now. If that can be successful, then we will be able to release a direct to consumer version of what we have, which would be like $30 a month app, and you don't have to see a therapist to use it. You can be in control of which games you use. So that was kind of our idea. It's like for the cost of a copay, you could keep doing this unlimited and have access to all 60 games and play which ones you think are helpful to you. So that is our next stage plan. If we can overcome some of the financial barriers to do it. It's really hard to get traditional investors like your venture capitalists to invest in rehab because it's just not a lucrative space for them, and they go where the money is. So we're attempting like a crowd fund, and we'll see if we can get there to try to make that a reality. In the meantime, if it's something that you're like, oh, I really want to have access to, we do have a PC version of it. So just email me about it and we could kind of arrange something to get you access to that PC version before kind of like as a pre-release essentially. So just be in communication with me if you're interested. But that's definitely a challenge. And there are companies that have done that, but a lot of the time those companies just aren't able to sustain themselves financially because of all the challenges in doing business in the rehab space. It's just really it's a hard road for sure.
So if I wanted to play the game right now, I could actually email you and you would send something that I could do on my PC. Is that what you're saying?
So we do have a version that runs on a Windows PC.
Thank you. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and our goal is to get everything on the App Store direct to consumer, but really the only piece that we're lacking right now is the user interface. But when you try to design something that's easy to use, it's easier said than done, right? It can take quite a bit of funds to be able to design something that's like, oh, I can program it myself in 30 seconds. Because if it's not easy to use, people won't do it. So there are some financial logistical challenges that we're trying to navigate through. But my goal is to be able to kind of get this out there and help the people that need it. which is why I did it. I didn't start this to like, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and, you know, make tons of money. I started down that path of commercialization because we had something that worked, that patients liked, that was creating really good clinical gains and really solved the problem that we were trying to solve. And I felt like it was just unethical to keep it in a lab. So, you know, spent quite a bit of my own time and money trying to get it out there. And we'll see in the next couple months whether that can work or not.
Let's hope it does.
Yeah. So if you know anybody who would be interested in kind of being part of that mission, you know, put them in touch. I can share our WeFunder link as well after the meeting. So here's some examples
I'd
of
probably like to send this to the stroke rehab at UCSF in California. So if I go to your website, I'd be able to get all that info.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not satisfied with what's going on. For me personally, the thing about stroke, everyone's different. So what's not working for me might be working for somebody else. So I can't really criticize. But, you know, that's part of the challenge we all face.
Mm-hmm.
Finding the right type of exercise or therapy that gives us what we want. For me, I want my hand back, you know, and I'm walking okay. But I'd rather have my hand back and give up my leg, to be honest with you, if I had to pick between the two.
Yep. Yeah, and it's really challenging too, because when you go to the, you know, the outpatient rehab, you're going once, twice a week, maybe.
If I'm lucky, how about once a month?
Yeah, right. It depends on the insurance, right? So
Yeah,
and
pretty
it's
much.
very limited visits. You're not going to be able to get. We've done mapping of the dose response, and some people can recover in that amount of time, but it's less than 50% that get enough in their traditional outpatient rehab.
Yeah.
Most people need, you know, upwards of hundreds of hours. You're not going to get that in a standard rehab. And
You know what?
that's the reason why home-based is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this looks real interesting, so I'm going to follow through. I can always contact you if I have any questions and stuff like that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm signing off. Thank you.
All right. And I have a quick video from Nancy Strahl, who's a stroke survivor that we worked with in our trial. So she just gives some tips that I thought might be useful for the group to hear.
Some of the major patient challenges active at the same time I was helping myself. Some things I think that therapists need to consider when they're considering gaming therapy for a patient is that the patient does need a limited amount of movement to begin gaming. If there is no movement at all, you have to work with the patient to get some movement so that they're able to successfully begin the game. I personally thought it was very good to start physical therapy immediately after the stroke event. And then there was a gradual transition into other therapies that I used. And I also think that if you do standard therapy and get the patient a little bit more stabilized, it's much easier for the patient to transition into the gaming therapy. The patient needs a fair amount of daily energy and be motivated to not be frustrated with the game. That is the advantage of having the game in your house for 24 hours. You can do it when you feel like you have the most energy. What I did find was when I initially started the game, I could only play for about 5 minutes. And that was because there were so many repetitions and my brain was trying to process how the game worked that I would be exhausted. But as you learn the game and your limbs start to move more freely, you can play longer. And the guidance you get from an in-person therapist when you first start the game is very vital, I felt. I had a lot of encouragement, and I was shown items in the game that would help me function better in the game itself. Some of the advantages I found from a patient perspective was, of course, 24-hour access at home in a comfortable environment. It was very easy to use and set up, especially for older and younger people. A lot of times older people say, well, I can't do that, that's video. But this was a very, very easy to do. It's not required to have a lot of high-tech computer or expensive equipment. And what was really important was the game is very challenging and has a lot of interesting different levels of play. The gaming scenario is outdoor themed, which I especially participated since it was very difficult to get outdoors at that time. And you are actually an avatar kayaker navigating a river which is constantly changing. The game adapts to the patient as your mobility increases to keep the game interesting and challenging. So if you're having a particular problem or issue with a certain activity, it will keep repeating that, or it will change and adapt to your situation, which I thought was just incredible at the moment. You do get immediate data feedback, and that motivates you to keep on moving to the next level. The patient is very motivated because they see the game as play and not intense movement therapy. It's not boring, and you're not sitting there with a lot of papers with exercises and text that you have to read along the way. All you have to do is get up, turn the game on, and start to play. It progressively gets more intense for the upper limb repetitions as you play, the playtime, and you get a lot more repetitions than if you had a 45-minute with a physical therapist. As closing, I'd like to say to all the medical professions that the most important thing you can give your patient is hope. And hope is motivation for a lot of people. And I saw that this video gaming gave me hope that I could actually be successful with my rehabilitation at home.
Love Nancy. She's great. Nancy actually led one of our sites in our clinical trial. So anybody else have any comments about exercise specifically or techniques that helped them, maybe even outside of gaming, to promote exercise and get their bodies moving? All right.
I use Pilates, but it's an excellent rehab tool. If you can use a reformer, and yeah, and yoga, I find are two very good ways of exercising after a stroke.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And yoga is one of the things that I do as well, for managing some of my chronic conditions that I have. And I would say like the game is a piece of my toolbox. It's not the only thing I use. So I do my yoga once a week, and that's like stress management as well as, it just keeps everything loose and stretched. And then I do the game a few times a week I have like an abdominal separation from having twins. And that's something that you have to chronically keep up with, because if I stop exercising, it opens back up again. And then I'm just not as stable in my core. And I also have knee problems. So when I do those, I have to do those specific exercises. And if I stop doing them, pain comes back and I end up like just not being as stable. So the game is kind of what I use to just like hear the exercises that I have to do, or I'm gonna, regress in my functioning. And then for general exercise, one of the things that I do is I fired my landscaping crew, and I do it all myself, which is a lot of physical activity, and I don't want my yard to look crappy. So it kind of pushes me to get out there and do that. I'll also like park my car further from where I need to be. So instead of taking the spot closest to the door, I take the spot in the back of the parking lot, and then I'll have to just do more walking to get back and forth. So I've kind of set up my environment to force me to do more physical activity because it's not something that I'm like, once I get started, I don't mind it too much, but I'm not like, oh, I really want to exercise. That's so fun because it's just kind of not. I have to pair it with things that are more fun. Like I'll put in a really interesting audiobook and then I'll go do yard work for 2 hours. But the book is interesting, so that makes it fun for me. The gardening itself, not really fun. Satisfying, you get that finished product at the end and you feel like you accomplished something, but it's not fun so that I'm gonna like go out and do it unless I can motivate myself by having something interesting to look at. I think Simon has a comment.
Yeah, hi. I agree that the motivation is really hard. I'm now 5 years past. I never go through a door or past the light switch without trying to do it right-handed. Um, the I have when I have a shower, I always try and wash myself right-handed. It takes 5 times longer. Um, I have to pick the soap or the sponge up 10 times in 2 minutes. But it used to be that I couldn't move my hand at all. And now I still can't really move my hand, but I can move the whole of my arm. So I really did have to put pegs on a cup and squeeze bits of Play-Doh. It was therapy in the first year. But now I just build exercise into the daily routine. I open the car door with my right hand. I also do a lot of gardening, which gardening in this country rather than yard work, but I go out and dig the garden. And the more you can build it in, and the more you can have a buddy, like stroke buddies is great because you can talk to people. So get a buddy and tell them what exercises you did that week and how much you've improved in the last 6 months, and keep telling them and they tell you, and you give each other encouragement.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that actually transitions really nicely in what we're going to talk about next, too, the everyday habit change and use. So thanks for that intro to that topic. I think we have Vaughn also has a question or comment.
Yeah, comment. Mine's more about gaming. I'm a big gamer, huge gamer before the stroke, and like honestly, one of my main goals is to be able to use a controller again. But my partner, he has a Wii, and so we've been working on using that, like the game Punch Out, where you have to use both hands. Like I can grip the nunchuck in my left hand and like move up to like punch with it. I think that's really fun. That's why I signed up for this webinar as soon as I saw it. But I also wanted to bring up, it's not like a traditional game. It's a book. It's called Super Better, and I've been using that as well. The author of it is a TBI survivor, and she developed this game to help her manage her symptoms and to like kind of progress and get better. She calls it getting super better. And it's a game that you apply to your everyday life. You gamify your life to improve it and utilize the post-traumatic growth. And I just wanted to recommend that to everybody, because a lot of what you're saying, Lynn, is in that book actually. So I definitely want to recommend it.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
I'll write it in the chat for people.
Yeah, I actually knew I worked with one of the people who was on that team developing that. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's great. And Nita Rose?
Yeah, the one thing that's very nice about a therapy, gaming therapy that's designed for therapy, is the feedback. It's nice to have that feedback. And also the therapy game that I'm using, they have an ISO, a little like a egg thing that you can use to squeeze and release and pinch, and it's really good for your hand because it's much better to get the feedback, whereas when you're squeezing and releasing a cloth or putty, it's boring and it doesn't give you the feedback. But on the gaming, as you're pressing it, even if you have the slightest bit of a pinch or a grip, it actually shows. And initially I had no grip. My husband would actually grip for me and he could see it. And slowly I was able to release and squeeze and release this tool and see it, I think that the feedback is one of the most important parts of gaming that you don't get in therapy. And in
Yes,
traditional therapy.
motivation for sure. I've heard that
Yeah.
a lot, that it's like, and you don't see those small changes as they're happening, but then you can look at the chart. Oh, here's where I was a month ago. And I would do that with the patients that I worked with too. I would get those objective data when they started because they didn't realize they were getting better as they went along because it happened so slowly. If it's happening over months, it's hard to see that instant change, right? But then you show them, oh, here's where you were when you started, or here's the video, like watch your movement, or here's what you scored on these measures, and oh wow, like I really am a lot better. So that really helped them. And I think even that instantaneous feedback, of course, when you have a stroke and you're moving, some movements are going to be better than others. So when you're getting that feedback, like, oh, this was a 8 out of 10 movement and this one was a 4 out of 10, you're going to want to hit that 8 out of 10 more often. So it just keeps you working harder too. It like pushes you to keep going. Or even just the game score, like, oh, I got a higher game score this time. I need to do it again because like I don't want to end on a bad one. So I've seen people, just those bits of feedback can help with some of the motivation barriers too. All right, so we're going to transition a little into the next thing that Simon actually gave me a nice intro to and shared some of his experiences with everyday habit change and use. So in my research, I actually trained with Ed Taub, who's the inventor of constraint-induced movement therapy. Some of you may know about that. And he started off as a basic scientist working in monkeys and then translated what he learned in monkeys into stroke rehab. And sometimes it takes an outsider to bring in something that's really important that people who are in the system don't really, you've been trained in a certain mindset, you're not going to think outside the box. But he was trained in monkeys, so it was easier for him to kind of bring these techniques into stroke rehab. And what we know from the monkey research is that the brain, if you're not using a limb, for example, you actually get a maladaptive brain plasticity. So not all brain plasticity is good. You can get brain plasticity that causes chronic pain. You'll see that in phantom limb. If someone loses a limb, they still feel like the limb is there. And if they're not moving the arm as much, they can actually end up with more pain in that limb. And getting them moving that arm again can help with the pain aspect. Same with function. When you're not using it, that cortical territory gets kind of invaded by other stuff. So part of keeping up with managing a chronic condition like stroke or TBI, MS, is to keep using the affected body part. And then they've seen this both functionally and structurally. So you see this is the functional, like these are the areas of brain that are excited when you move. And then if you're not using it as much, like that area decreases. And then we see it structurally too in the actual gray matter where all the neurons are located. That shrinks when you're not using the arm as much. So here's
I got
again
a
in a stroke brain.
quick
Mhm.
question. You being a neuroscientist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any advantage to having my brain scans be looked at in such a way that, like an fMRI or a STRET, I think it was called, the thing that Dr. Amen does, where it could show blood flow
Not
in the
really.
brain?
I wouldn't say there's a therapeutic advantage to that, but I would say that you see very small changes on an MRI scan, but they're not going to be important for knowing how to do your therapy. The science has not progressed to the point where you can take a brain scan and say, okay, this is the ideal therapy for that person. So it
That
doesn't really make sense
the
to get the
ideal therapy
expensive.
for that area. That's
What's
what
that?
I'm. the ideal therapy for that area. Like if you go into an fMRI and I can move my finger a little bit like
Mhm.
that, and I can see what's firing when I do that with my hand, right? Isn't that beneficial in some way?
The scan,
You
not
know?
really. It's not going to change what the therapist, because there's no guidelines or anything to follow for therapists to say, oh, this person's brain looks like this. We're going to do these exercises. That data just doesn't exist.
Okay.
And it's really hard to collect that data because the imaging techniques themselves are kind of dirty. So you
Yeah.
need large numbers of people to see those changes, which means that in any one individual patient, you may or may not see that change.
Well, I
So
guess I should
this
get
data
on
that
that.
I'm showing is like on groups
Yeah.
of people.
Right.
I will say though that there are some techniques that you can do, and I don't think this is done as part of standard clinical practice and may not even help a ton. But if you do have certain activations, for example, if you stimulate the cortex and then you can get a muscle twitch in your hand, then that's a good prognostic
I
indicator
like
that you're going to be,
TMS.
yes, that you'll be
Yeah.
able to get more hand function back. So there are some of those prognostic indicators, but they're so expensive right now that it makes more sense just to try to rehab the hand
Yeah,
and
I
see
was
if it
part of
comes
a
back.
I was part of a TMS trial, and they said I improved 10%, whatever that means, or 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
Still not good enough for me.
Yeah, and I
Nothing's
would
gonna
say
be
like
good enough.
TMS, there's research that says, oh, stimulate the brain, and that's why
Yeah.
maybe some of you thought that's what I was going to talk about when I talked about everyday
No,
things you can do. But that stuff creates very small improvements, and the amount of improvement is it
oh, yeah.
justified by the cost, or can you just do,
No,
a
but the
little bit
real
more
improvement,
exercise to get the
yeah,
same improvement?
the real improvement comes from the repetition
Yeah. And the
and the push.
everyday
Yeah,
activities.
right.
So it's not just, and this is one of the things I want to emphasize, and Simon said it really well. It's not like you go home and, oh, I'm just going to practice like picking pennies out of a can of beans, or
I
I'm
hate
just
that.
going to practice moving these pegs around. That's not what I'm talking about.
Oh,
So
good,
it's,
because I hate that.
yeah, right. Well, who doesn't?
I
But
don't
it's
do it.
really about habit change and using your arm more for everyday activities.
Yeah,
Or
like opening the refrigerator.
exactly. So it's really
Yeah.
about habit change, and the brain imaging actually supports that. So one of the studies that I did, this study, you had a control group, and the control group did exercises. So they did your traditional therapy exercises in the clinic. They got some movement from that. The constraint induced movement therapy group did that plus the behavior change stuff at home. So they really emphasized what Simon was talking about, like I'm going to use my arm for everything. And even if it
Yeah.
takes longer, even if it's hard, I'm going to use that weaker side for everything I can possibly do with it. And even if I can't do it by itself, like I'll help with the other arm, but I want to involve the weaker arm in pretty much everything I'm doing, whether or not it's even helpful, but just to get that movement. And they'd set up their house so that the soap would be on the other side of the sink so that they'd have to use their weaker arm. They'd set up like things like adding pulls to the zippers on your shirt so that they could do it with their weaker side. So, maybe wrapping a washcloth around a utensil so that they're trying to eat with their weaker side. And the more they're
Yeah.
using it for the everyday activities, that's what's stimulating the neuroplasticity and the brain growth more than just practicing these exercises. And that's another reason
Yeah.
why the game
Yeah.
isn't the only thing you need to do. So the game is great because it gets you moving, it gets you exercise, and you need the exercise to create like the fertile soil, right? So think about exercise as creating the fertile
Mhm.
soil for your neuroplasticity. It's a really important part of this, but it's not the only thing. You also need to incorporate habit change and doing your everyday activities with that weaker side.
Well, my
Question.
neurologist wanted me to tie my good hand behind my back.
Mm-hmm. And you can do that, but actually they've said that the restraint isn't super important. And the studies show that restraining it doesn't really help, but using the weaker side is where the magic is. So
Right.
you have to think
Right.
about ways to change your habits of not using the weaker side or ignoring it. Sometimes people even forget that they have a weaker side because it's
Yep.
years later and they've adapted to doing everything with one hand and that's quicker. But if you want to get that function back, you really have to
Mhm.
train yourself to not ignore it.
Got
We've got a
Quick
couple of folks
question
raising
for you.
hands.
Question
Um,
for you. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ms. Owen. I'll
All
try
right.
at some point.
All right. I'll be quick. Thanks, Ralph. I
No,
have a
no.
question on from your studies. I know it's focused on the weaker side, but is there any evidence based on your research of if the strong arm is still part of the exercises? Is there any carryover to the weaker side at all? I know there's a little bit of study with that, but I was just
Yeah,
curious to
I
see.
would. So you're talking about two-handed tasks? Two-handed tasks
Yes.
is fine. I think the key is that the weaker side is involved.
Yeah.
So if the weaker side is doing it by itself, great. If it can't and you need to use the other hand, so when you can use just the weaker side, use just the weaker side. Like if it's
Right.
just pulling open the cabinet and you can do that, maybe it takes an extra second, but you can get the cabinet open with just the weaker side. Use just the weaker side because it helps train that habit of using it more so your body doesn't ignore it. And
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just wondering, like, because I don't know the video games. There's the video games. Let's say there's a lot of more exercises that you could you are doing with the weaker arm, weaker side, and the stronger side is being active or more active. Does that help the weaker side at all?
Yeah,
I
That's what
would
I'm
say
getting.
only if they need to use the stronger arm as like a body weight support. I think in terms of the gaming, you want to do just the weaker side if you can. And
Okay.
now I've worked with some folks who they just don't have quite enough, so maybe they're trying to like get some shoulder abduction, raising your arm to the side, and they can only get it like this far, and the game can't it doesn't move enough that the game can really recognize what they're doing yet. So they may have to give it a little nudge. So they're doing whatever they can with the weaker side and then helping support against gravity a little bit with the stronger side to get started until that shoulder gets strong enough to do it with just the weaker side. So when you need to use the stronger side as a support, do it, but it's very easy for it to kind of take over and then take away some of the benefit if you're doing too much of the work with the weaker side. And I think just in terms of the way that the brain activates when you move, when you're moving your left arm, it inhibits the part of the brain that moves your right arm and vice versa. And that's so that you don't, like, your arms don't interfere with each other when you're doing a task. So that's the way our nervous system is designed, which means that when you're using the stronger arm, you're actually inhibiting the part of the brain that you're trying to get neuroplasticity from. So it's best if you can do it just with the weaker arm by itself, but that's not always feasible. So sometimes you
Right.
need to
I
add in
guess
that
I'm more
stronger
thinking about movement more than anything. That's all.
arm. Yeah,
Like if
movement
you're
is
doing like
key.
let's say you're doing a like you're doing a punching game and you can only do the punches with your strong arm.
hmm
That's what I'm getting at.
that's not going to help your weaker arm. So if you're,
Yeah.
it will help. It will help with the exercise component. So like
Right.
it'll create that fertile soil, or if so to speak, so that you can get the neurogenesis. So that if you're using the weaker arm for other things outside the game, you may get more benefit from those activities. But training the stronger arm is not going to improve your weaker arm at all.
What about
Yeah.
doing both? I got a couple things to say. Gosh,
Doing both is fine. I would still say for neuroplasticity, if you use just the weaker arm, that's the best.
oh yeah,
Both arms is next best. Yeah.
but
Okay.
I agree with you about that. Let me back up a sec. What Simon's talking about is functional therapy, and it's a great idea. It's a good way to get, like gaming, to get a lot of therapy in during your day, constantly using that affected upper extremity usually, but works with lower as well. I did everything with my affected hand in the beginning, and it's been studied and it's a very effective therapy, and it'll also keep you away from that learned non-use thing that you were talking about. I found that I did a lot of recovery by doing bilateral therapy, modeling, like learning how to roll my fingers again. Which hand?
Mhm.
And things like that. I've also, when I found out about ipsilateral, I believe Dr. Hetzler is here, but I believe that 15, I don't believe, I think the science is that 10 to 15% of the signals when you move go from if you're moving your unaffected side, that 10 or 15% of the signals are sent over to the affected side. I don't know if anybody's studying ipsilateral therapy that much. Probably they are, and I don't know about it. I fooled around with it some, and I found it's real useful. I made a video called Three Potatoes, and I couldn't pick them up very well with my affected hand. And then I kind of patterned my brain. I think there's twofold. I think there's maybe some neuroplasticity going on, but I think also it gives you a visual map. I picked up the potatoes a couple times well, actually only once with my unaffected hand, and then I picked them all three of them up with my affected hand in about 1/4 the time it took me in the first time. So I don't know what your thoughts are on.
Yeah, so my
on
thought
that.
with that is that from a neural basis, I think that's harnessing action observation. So if you watch a video of someone doing the task, it primes the same brain areas as that are doing that task. So if you watch your other hand do it, it may be priming those movement related brain areas, especially if you're thinking about, now I'm going to do this with my weaker hand. As you're watching your other hand do that, you're focusing and actually activating the same brain areas. And that primes them to be more excitable, which would make the task easier. They've actually done studies where they do mental practice or action observation where you're watching the movement happen. Or another example is in a game, you have an avatar and you're watching the avatar, and as you move, like the avatar's hand goes way up even though your hand can only go part way up. But seeing that
Right.
movement will activate the brain areas and actually facilitate the movement. So I think that's a lot of what's happening there. Because in the moving the stronger arm, you're actually inhibiting the motor cortex that moves the weaker arm. But now we're not like one-handed creatures, right? We do things together. So
Right.
patterned activity with both hands, you're going to be sending signals back and forth between the two sides of the brain. That's good. So I wouldn't say we want to only do that, but that's certainly a good thing to add in. Musical instruments, playing the piano, for example, can be a great way of getting that little bit of if you just have that very mild deficit where your fingers just haven't fully come back. So something like that would be a natural bimanual task. I wouldn't say you want to like force bimanual on a task that can be done with just that hand.
Quickly, I'm not trying to be argumentative in any way. I'm trying to explore this, but okay. So this is my affected side, the left. If I try and do circles with my left, look at how jerky it is. Now
Mm-hmm.
watch this.
Yep.
Okay, here, one more. This is, I did a lot with bilateral therapy. This is a visual demonstration. The only thing I do behind my head is tie my hair back, and I've intentionally not worked on that other than tied my hair back so I can keep doing this. So basically, and the faces I'm going to make are not pain or anything, they're frustration about not being able to do this right. So if I put my hand back, you can see a jerk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do that a few times. That's about the best I can do. Let me try and smooth it out. If I slow it down, nope, it's still jerky. Okay, let me do both now. I'll do like 5 times. 1, 2, much smoother. 3, 4, 5. Now watch this. 1, 2, 3. Starting to feel the jerk. 4. No, so I only got 3. I've gotten as many as 8 or 9. So I gotta think something's going on here. I'm not.
So that jerky has nothing to do with, is that spasticity that's kicking in when it starts jerking?
I don't know if it's spasticity. I have I had a stroke in my thalamus, right thalamus, and I have an intentional tremor. If I try and pick up this salt shaker, as I go for it, my hand will shake. Once I grab it, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, because I play the piano and my
So
fingers
I'm
go.
not sure. I'm not sure how much is spasticity and how much is intentional tremor.
Yeah, from a
Because I can.
scientific explanation, I think what's happening there is when you're doing certain, especially gross motor functions bilaterally, it actually activates different neural pathways than if you're doing that single hand. So if you want to strengthen the neural pathways for the single isolated movements, you want to do those single isolated movements. But you can get better function maybe like you're talking about if you activate different neural pathways. So you're essentially rerouting because there's different tracks that activate some of those proximal movement. There's essentially multiple different roads you can go to get that muscle activation. So when you're using both hands, you may be going down a different road.
Well, but like I kind of discovered this on my own before I knew anything about bilateral therapy or anything. When I decided I wanted to be able to roll my fingers, and I couldn't do it very well with my affected hand, so I started doing the same thing. And well, first I went, oh, okay, that's what it's supposed to look like, and I tried over here, it didn't work. So I said, what happens if I try them together? And it was much better over here. So what I used to do was I'd do like 5 together, and then I'd do 5 or 10 or 15 or however many, focusing on that side, but I was using this hand to get it towards better form. Just like in here, I was able to do 3 with pretty good form after that patterning. So I don't know, it's just something that interests me. I'm always fooling around, touching muscles, seeing what's activating when I walk with my
Yeah.
gluteus medius or back muscles and things. I'm just always fooling around. So
And I think that's great. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that every stroke brain is different
right,
because it affects different pathways. So something that works for you may not work for somebody else. And that's what
right.
makes it so hard to study stroke, right? Is
I
because
know.
everybody's brain is different. And if you think about it like a map of the city, like one person has a detour in one place, another person has a detour in a different place. And that's going to affect your traffic patterns differently, right? So if something is working for you, by all means, keep doing it. I would never suggest that anybody not do something that's working for them.
Well, and I never take the things that work for me or even things I learn about that I didn't do and unilaterally suggest them to people. It's always, you have to try and see what works for you. That's why body awareness and paying attention to what's going on, not just doing your, therapy, which is another good reason for gaming because you're forced to focus, more attention on it than just, doing that.
Mhm.
Anyway, so
And that's why habit change is important too, because it gets you to be aware of your body and what it's doing and how much it's participating. Yeah.
I didn't deal with that, but I'm unusual. Whether I felt like it or not, I got up and you don't know this, Lynn, but I literally did 10 to 12 hours of physical therapy, 15-minute sessions every hour on the hour from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 15 months. And I got
Wow.
burned out, walked away from it, said I'm tired of pulling on rubber bands and discovered in about a month if I didn't do at least some minimum that I was going to regress. And I did not want to regress and lose any of the gains that I had made. So I've sort of kind of continued to be active, do some physical therapy. Some of it I get like through functional therapy. I still use this hand for everything. I still try and get my steps in and such. I practice balancing on my affected leg when I'm pumping gas, when my dinner's in the microwave, there are all kinds of opportunities to do therapy during the day that most people don't take advantage of. But then again, I'm a nutcase, so I can't expect everybody to do what I do, for sure.
Well,
Well, that's
I'm
but
with
what you're
I'm
doing
with
is
you.
perfect and that's sustainable. That's what makes it sustainable. It's you can't sustain 10 to 15 hours a day of doing planned exercises. It's just not it's not fun and that's not the life you want either. But
That's
I
why,
think
yeah,
what you're
that's why
talking about
every
is
day is therapy.
exactly
Hold
what
on,
the
Rich.
evidence says works well.
Well, I mean, you know, well, all I can say is it worked for me. I was walking in pretty well in 3 months, and I was rolling my fingers in 3 months. So the biggest problem I had was getting my arm up over my shoulder because the deltoid muscles, I mean the muscles that rotate your scapula, you end up not using them for a long time after your stroke, and they're hard to engage again. Anyway.
Yeah, so this is the formula. I think that what you're talking about is you must have enough of that motor practice, but that motor practice does not have to occur as part of a therapy session. It can occur just like you're talking about opening the microwave, making dinner, eating my dinner with the weaker side, taking, if it's a lower extremity, taking a walk, right? That's activating those muscles. So you need to do intense motor practice. It doesn't have to be a therapy. And then you need to pair it with that exercise.
If
And the evidence says 150 minutes per week is kind of the target that you want. So it's about a half an hour day where you're getting sweaty and your heart rate up. Some people can't get their heart rates up enough because of medical reasons or because they just can't move their body enough to do that. So it's okay to do more light exercise. You just have to do it longer. So if you're not someone who can exercise enough to work up a sweat, you just exercise twice as long at a very low level, whatever you can do, and that will still give you a good benefit.
Yeah.
One more thing, I don't normally plug things that we've done, but Dr. Hetzler may or may not be here, and I and William Lowe, and one of them, we had talks on both visual imagery, mental practice being one and the same, two different names, and we also did a talk on functional therapy. That's the idea of using your hand or limb for everything you possibly can. They're both on the Stroke Buddies YouTube channel at Stroke Buddies, and Dr. Hetzler has his own playlist, and they're both in that playlist, so they're pretty easy to find. Anybody who wants them can messenger me, and I'll drop you the playlist link.
I think DJ Foster has something you want to share?
Say what?
Yeah, yes, I have something I want to share. So every time I try any kind of cardio or like I garden a lot, that gets my balance back and stuff like that. So I can't, my right side is my weaker side. So I try pulling weeds with my weaker side a lot. And I try to put the trowel in the ground with my right side. But anyway, and then I start getting a little bit more physical, like turning the compost bin. Every time I get my heart rate up to around 100, I go into AFib. So that's aggravate me because I get so aggravated that I can't get any cardio in because I go into AFib.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, certainly that's something to talk to your doctor about, and I assume you'll probably already have.
Yes,
but it is okay. It is okay. You can still get the benefit of those exercises that you're doing at a lower intensity and whatever is safe for you. It is limiting, so that is definitely frustrating. But it's okay to take it easier. It's not like you're missing out on the opportunity to exercise. You just have to exercise longer if you're not getting your heart rate as high.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So I do daily exercises. I do chair yoga. I take my dog out for a walk. My right side is the affected side, and so I knit and I sew, and I do needlework, and that really helps me with my right side, my right hand, which was affected greatly. It helps me build back function. But my biggest challenge is balance. And I'm wondering what one does for that. Like I list to one side and I'm dizzy a lot, and it's just really frustrating.
Yeah, so balance is a tricky one, and it kind of depends on where in the brain your stroke disrupted. So, there's different areas of the cerebellum that are responsible for balance. So it really kind of depends on where in the neural circuitry is affected. Balance exercises do help most people with balance challenges. So doing things like sit to stand exercises. And if you're somebody who you worry about the safety aspect of exercising, setting up where you exercise can be important and helpful. So I know some people who've done their exercise in a narrow hallway. That way they're not falling to the side because the wall is there. Or they'll do in front of like a couch or a cushy chair. They'll do sit to stands so that if they fall over, they just fall into a cushy chair and they don't get injured.
Yeah.
So I think as much as you can work those things without worrying about injury, that can be helpful. Some folks even have a swing set, and you can put a little harness hanging down from your swing set and do some body weight supported stuff like that at home. So you can get kind of creative with the balance exercises. There are balance games. Even some of the commercial systems like we have like balance board and things like that. And then some of these rehab games do heavily work on balance as well, because that's something that everybody needs to work on.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would say, wherever you can incorporate balance training in your daily life in a way that's safe, try to just work on that as much as you can.
Okay.
Curious.
Thank
If I
you.
could make a comment or two.
Okay, Bruce. Hi, Bruce.
Okay, this is Bruce Setzler here. I heard a couple of recent posts that I might comment on. One dealt with a person who got into atrial fibrillation. You should really talk to a cardiologist about that and see what medications might be useful for that. I had occasional atrial fibrillation before I had a stroke and saw a cardiologist. I'm currently seeing a cardiologist, and I take a daily atenolol that has kept that in check for about 14 years. There's been no atrial fibrillation. Now, I don't super exercise. I'm too lazy for that. But you might talk to a cardiologist about what medication might be useful for atrial fibrillation. Now, I will say, after my stroke, when I came out of the hospital, a doctor put me on a drug called amiodarone for the atrial fibrillation. That's something that's given to someone that has got severe atrial fibrillation, and I checked it out, and one potential side effect of that is permanent blindness. So I quickly called my cardiologist and said, I don't want to do that. He said, okay. And I got on atenolol and have been on it ever since, and have not had any atrial fibrillation in at least 14 years. And you do want to avoid atrial fibrillation because it can cause a stroke. There was also a person commenting on balance. And in addition to the cerebellum, balance is also controlled by the inner ear. You've got semicircular canals, and you may want to see an audiologist. It could be that you've got something like Meniere's disease, which affects balance. So I would have that checked out also.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about balance. As far as, have you noticed that the deeper the stroke is, the harder it is for stuff to come back? Like mine was in the basal ganglia, which is a structure that's deep inside that controls motor function and emotion. And I was just wondering, as a neuroscientist, what your comments would be about.
So what I can say from the studies that I've done on this, if you look at, there's no relationship between lesion size, so the area of the brain that is affected, damaged by the stroke, and the functional outcomes. The location is much more important. So I've seen folks with a very itty bitty stroke that knocked out a lot of those roadways essentially. So think about like you've shut off a highway, right? Instead of shutting off a side street. You can have a very small lesion, and if it's in the wrong place, you can get quite pronounced challenges.
Yeah, that's me.
As far as things coming back, I haven't noticed much relationship between the size and the location and how much recovery people are getting. I'm sure that the location probably does matter to some extent, but we also have this thing called neuroplasticity where you can build new pathways. So you can reroute around some of that. There are certain locations in the brain that are just really damaging. Like if you have a brainstem stroke in the pons and it knocks out all four extremities, you can get something called locked-in syndrome. And it's just basically cut all the motor tracks coming down. So it's kind of like a spinal cord injury, only like up higher in your brain. Certainly that is harder to come back from. But other than that type of syndrome, and people still have recovered from that, by the way. So it's not impossible. It's just more challenging. But I think subcortical strokes and cortical strokes, I've still seen really good recoveries with both of them. So I wouldn't say either is, better or worse than the other.
Okay, thanks.
If I could comment one more time, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but the person just mentioned basal ganglia damage. The basal ganglia consist of three structures, the caudate, putamen, and globus pallidus. And the caudate in particular is important in the control of movement, and it is damage to the dopamine input to the caudate that causes Parkinson's disease. So strokes in the caudate may resemble Parkinson's disease in terms of the motor results, but they are not like Parkinson's disease because with Parkinson's disease, it continues to get worse. The neurons in that nigrostriatal dopamine pathway continue to degenerate, and Parkinson's disease will always get worse. But a stroke in the caudate will not necessarily get worse, and you can recover.
I'm not sure what mine was. I just know it was the right basal ganglia is very small, and I just have partial left-sided paralysis. So, shoulders work, hips work. It's the ankle and foot and wrist and fingers. So, I'm always the more I understand about what's going on in my brain, the more motivated I get to do stuff.
Okay, well, again, I'm not a neurologist. I have no idea exactly where the stroke was, but in addition to being part of the basal ganglia, it could have infringed on a structure known as the internal capsule, which is descending motor fibers, and that could cause the motor problems as well.
That would be my guess. Yeah, that would be with the symptoms that you're describing, because that's where the fiber tract goes right through the posterior limb and the internal capsule, and that's the tract that does the fine motor, more of the detailed,
should be able to buy a
movements.
new capsule, just install it. I should be able to buy a new capsule and install it.
Yeah, that would be nice, right? If you could just regrow it.
Yeah, dream on.
Yeah. Oh, your mic's
You're
off.
muted, Ralph. You're muted, Ralph.
And I think DJ has another comment or question as well.
Two things real quick, then we'll let DJ talk. One, Lynn, I didn't, Dr. Hetzler joined us later. I would have introduced you. He's also a neuroscientist who had a stroke, and he's a big part of our community. And I mentioned him in those two talks we had on mental imagery and functional therapy. And the other thing is, for you, Rich, this is totally anecdotal, but 9 years I've read hundreds, probably over 100,000 posts, and it just seems like the people that have strokes in the back of the brain, the cerebellum, the pons, the basal ganglia, and the brainstem all seem to have a harder time with it. It may be due to having more or some specific type of damage that's worse, but anecdotally, they tend to have more problems with balance, more problems with getting moving, more problems with, well, I worked with one who had 2 cerebellum strokes, and she presented on both sides. One was weaker than the other, but it's like she had 2 strokes. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. And DJ, you got the question, and so go ahead.
Okay. My stroke was caused by my AFib. The blood pooled over my left atrial, and it threw a clot from there. So now I had a stroke on the right side, a little bit on the left, and it had a brain bleed on the base of my brain. So they said it was a miracle that I survived it. So I have many challenges. But for the gentleman that was talking about the AFib, the different medications I tried, I've had 4 failed ablations, 2 of them in which were in my left atrial appendage. I've had a Watchman device. I've taken Midodrone. I got off that because I was losing my right side vision, and I've taken metoprolol. And when I take it, I had to get off that. So when I try to take a Tylenol or something like that, because I have low blood pressure anyway. So I have 90/60 when I wake up in the morning. That made my blood pressure plummet. I was like 60/30. So I was glad I woke up that morning, but it was crazy. So even just a half a tablet. So what they're going to do, they're going to try one more thing. They're going to ablate the AV node, which runs down the middle of your heart, and they're going to put a pacemaker in. So that will take care of my right bundle branch block. The pacemaker will not control the AFib, but it'll hopefully keep my rhythm in constant, steady rhythm. So hopefully after that, I may be able to do a little bit more cardio and stuff. So I tried all the drugs that you can try. So they say I'm medication resistant, and I've had 4 failed ablations. So I've tried everything I've tried in my, that you can try. And like I said, I'm waiting on a appointment to open up because they have all the elective surgeries shut down here in North Texas because of the flu outbreak. So anyway, they have to wait and see when I can get in. So anyway, that's what I want to talk about.
Good luck. Yeah, so that's a lot to manage.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
And like I said, with having a stroke in multiple places, that means I have multiple deficits. That's why I picked up gardening, because I got to use all the muscle. And one thing I really want to learn how to do again, I want to learn how to swim again. That's the most important thing to me, because I used to be a lifeguard before my stroke happened for Boy Scouts. And I used to be a swimming instructor for the boys that couldn't pass the swim test. So I used to be help them to learn how to pass the swim test by being a water instructor, swim instructor. So that's really important to me, but I can't swim anymore because I can't get my right arm completely out of the water. My right leg won't kick anymore. So anyway.
Well, if you have Watchman installed, you are not likely to throw another clot due to
Yes.
AFib. You could throw one some other way, but that pretty much fixes AFib in terms of the throwing a clot out of that left ventricle from not making complete beats. But you have
Yes.
other cardiac problems, and I'm not trying to be a cardiologist.
Yeah.
That sounds like you've got a good team in place, and good,
Yeah.
like Lynn
I had
said.
to go to Austin, Texas. I'm from the Dallas area. I had to go down to Austin, Texas to get the Watchman implant because the Dr. Andre Natali, if you Google who's the most famous electrophysiologist in the world, his name pops up first on Google. So he seems to have a really good. All he does is complicated arrhythmias all day long. That's all he does. They have the whole sixth floor dedicated to him. And all he does is do complicated arrhythmias all day long. Even has a suite there. He stays overnight there. So yes,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just trying to say I've seen the best that you can see. He's the one that did the left atrial appendage ablation. He did again, and then he put the Watchman device in as well. So my cardiologist here in North Texas is working with Andre Natali down in Houston. So they're working together.
Well, anybody who's got AFib or any type of arrhythmia could or should, in my opinion, consult an electrocardiologist. I switched over when I turned up with AFib 12 or 13 years post-stroke. It was not the cause of mine. I had a high blood pressure and a hemorrhagic stroke, but electrocardiologists are the bomb, and I go to the best one in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, so I've had my same electrophysiologist for 25 years now. So
all right. Well,
I have a regular cardiologist, but I see the electrophysiologist for 25 years now.
all right, let's get this back to gaming and everything, so we can let Lynn out of our get Lynn on her way. Not that I'm trying to get rid of her. Lynn, I don't know if you know this particular Stroke Buddies community. We've been doing this a while, and folks here know a little bit more and are more engaged than you might have expected. So
Yeah, I can see that. So you certainly have a lot more scientific knowledge than most of the stroke communities that I work with. So
well, I'd like to think that, Dr. Hetzler and myself and you and all the other, your number 150, all the other guests that we've had are helping to add to that, because if one of the things I preach is you need to learn all you can about the brain. You need to learn all you can about being your own physical therapist, setting up a home program, being your patient advocate, working with your physical therapist to get homework and all that.
yeah, that's
So
wonderful. It's
let's
really good
turn
to
it
be
back
here.
over to you so we can let you go when you're done.
All right, I want to briefly share the results of the science that we did on video gaming, and I think for this crowd, like, you'll probably understand it better than most people that I present to, so that's great. So the Vigorous Multi-Site Trial was a research study that we did on rehab gaming, and we compared a new model of care that used games at home to deliver most of the motor practice components of the intervention. And then the therapist met periodically in between with the person to talk mainly about habit change and how to actually to overcome that non-use and troubleshoot through doing different activities in their daily home. So we really changed the model of care and looked at what effect that had on outcomes. So we were asking 2 questions. Does rehab gaming work when unsupervised at home? And if the limited therapist time is spent differently on lifestyle interventions like we were talking about versus motor practice that is standard done in care, can we get better results? So in this trial, we had 4 different groups. We had one group that did in-clinic constraint-induced movement therapy. So this was 10 half-day clinic visits with motor practice and lifestyle intervention. So they got the behavior change and the intensive motor training in the clinic, one-on-one with a therapist. And it was like boot camp for the hand and arm. So they were there for half-day visits for 10 days. And then we had an in-home gaming group, and they only got 4 clinic visits. So this is on the pace that you get in traditional therapy, where they'd only come in like once or twice a week. So they had 2 visits the first week and then 1 visit the next 2 weeks. And during those visits, they did the lifestyle intervention components, and then did remote therapeutic monitoring of what they did at home with the game. But all of their intensive motor practice happened through the game. Then we had another gaming group that got the same 4 clinic visits, but they had less of the remote therapy monitoring sessions. So this gaming group, the first gaming group, got 10 contacts with a therapist. They talked to the therapist 10 times, same as the constraint-induced movement therapy group, but not for nearly as long. So these were like brief check-ins, really focused on habit change and what have you done with your weaker arm today? What are the challenges you're having with using that weaker arm? Let's problem solve through that. So then we had like a lighter version of that lifestyle intervention, essentially. So they got the same gaming prescription, lighter version of the habit change with the therapist. And then we had a standard care group, and those are just coming in once or twice a week for the traditional clinic visits, and then they got the regular home exercise program. So here's your paper-based, do these exercises kind of program. No game in that group. And then we looked at the outcomes. Looked at the motor activity log, which asks about how well their arm is working for doing standardized activities, and there are 28 different activities, such as turning on a light, opening a drawer, removing clothing from a drawer, picking up the phone, etc. And then the Wolf Motor Function Test, which is a standardized laboratory measure of how quickly and how well the person is able to use their weaker side. So one gets more at the actual function and ability level of the arm, that's the Wolf, and then the motor activity log gets at how they're actually using it in everyday life and how useful that arm is to them in everyday life. And then we looked at here are outcomes. So in terms of the Wolf motor function test, so how much function people got back, all groups were pretty similar. The group that got the most intensive one-on-one therapy maybe did a little bit better, but it wasn't like meaningfully more than the gaming groups or even than standard care. And then by follow-up, any differences between groups was completely gone. So regardless of what type of motor training you do, whether it's in the game or whether it's one-on-one with a therapist, I think the gist there is that it didn't really matter. Movement is movement. If you're doing those motor exercises, doesn't matter if it's with a therapist or in a video game or in a home exercise program, you're going to get the similar benefits from that. Where we saw the big difference was on the motor activity log, or how people were actually functioning day to day in their home, and how useful the weaker side was in their everyday activities. And we found that traditional therapy just didn't work well for that. That's kind of what we expected from talking with anybody who's had traditional therapy and knowing the literature about that. But those gains don't carry over to their everyday life. So you'll go in the clinic, you get stronger, you get faster, and then you come home. If you haven't focused on that habit change and those lifestyle interventions, what you're doing at home doesn't really change. And it's kind of a waste of all that effort you put in because you're not functioning better in your everyday life. So what we found from this is that the therapist time really needs to be spent on the lifestyle interventions. You can get the motor training anywhere. You can get it through a game. You can get it through home exercises that you're doing, or you can get it with a therapist. It doesn't really matter where you get it though. So what the therapist time should be spent doing is lifestyle intervention so that you can translate those changes into your everyday activities. And because you don't need to do standard training one-on-one with a therapist to improve, because it can improve just as much through a game, that's where the gaming kind of comes in. Instead of therapists spending all that time one-on-one doing the motor training pieces, they should be talking about lifestyle interventions, what you're doing every day, how you're moving your weaker side. So that's the big take home from this study, is that therapist time needs to be spent doing that. We also looked at retention, and people do change their habits over time and you get some sustained change, but people need to be reminded to keep doing it. So not all of those gains were maintained, only about 60% of them were retained. So it does seem important to talk to a therapist or a friend or, somebody that you're accountable to problem solve through how you're using your weaker side in everyday life. Because if you stop focusing on it, those gains go away. They're not fully retained. We also found a really interesting impact of therapist contact on how much exercise somebody did with the game. So there were two groups that had the game, one that had 10 contacts with a therapist, another only had 4 contacts with a therapist. And we found that each contact with a therapist promoted about 52 minutes of additional in-home gameplay. So it was just that accountability, knowing someone is checking in on them, really seemed to serve as a motivator to get people to do more on their own. So this speaks to the importance of having an accountability structure, whether it's with a therapist, a personal trainer, a relative. You need someone that you're checking in on. You need to be accountable so that you'll have that motivation to keep doing the things that are good for you. So to summarize, rehab gaming, it works as a multiplier. It works as well as in clinic practice. So you can use it instead of in clinic practice. When you change the interaction with the therapist to focus on carryover and lifestyle interventions, you get much better carryover. So that's a better use of that one-on-one time with a therapist. It does promote longer term access that can help with, some of those loss of gains over time. And it's a lower cost way to keep up your exercise and your rehab. And then you also have the additional cardio exercise benefit that happens in a game that typically doesn't happen in a clinic. When you're doing just arm exercises in a clinic, your heart rate isn't really going up that much, but the pace of rehab gaming is so much higher that you actually do get a cardio benefit that's about equivalent to walking, or maybe even more intensive than walking, depending on the game and how much movement the person has. And then just to end, the last neuroplasticity boosting tip is to boost meaningful and social activities. So exercise is great. Gaming is a great way to get exercise. And then doing the everyday activities with the weaker side is great. But we need to, again, support, the soil in your brain, essentially. So you have to have a nourishing environment for which you can get that neuroplasticity. If you're sitting in a dark room by yourself, not doing anything, your neuroplasticity is going to go down. You're going to get depressed. And depression suppresses all brain activity. So we need to do things that are meaningful and keep engaged in living through meaningful activities and social activities and connection with others if we want to foster a brain climate where we can really harness neuroplasticity and get the benefit of some of these other activities. So I'll end there and open it up to any last questions that folks have. Ralph, you're on mute again.
I think we asked about everything possible and then a few more. Anyway, so yeah, let's wrap this up and let everybody get about their day. Just want to remind everybody out in YouTube land that Dr. Gauthier's contact information will be down in the description underneath this video if you want to reach out about any of the things that she's talked about today. Feel free to do that, and I would remind you that you're welcome to post any studies or whatever. Also, Stroke Buddies might be a good place for you to find some. I believe the title on that woman on the video was research partner. Some more research partners. They're gone here now, but certainly Musong and Richard Ressler and possibly Simon. And we have a number of quite curious people here who also believe, well, it's kind of twofold. They want the knowledge for themselves, but they're also interested in advancing the whole thing, science for the sake of science and also for the sake of the other stroke survivors, because when you go through this, you have empathy for anybody who's trying to pick themselves up. So that's it's more than 2 cents. We've had inflation. That's my dollar's worth.
Where can we get access to these games? Where can we get access to these games?
So contact me. You can reach out to me directly.
Okay.
Like I said, we're working on a WeFunder campaign right now to try to make a direct consumer offering. We tried to go the clinic route to like go through insurance so it would get paid for, because we didn't want people to have to spend any money on it, but we just weren't able to get the clinicians on board enough with that that model. So we're trying to retool and make it direct to consumer, but we've got some challenges with, finishing building out a user interface and things like that.
I'll also say, Lynn, that if you have a link to that crowdfunding thing or whatever, I'd be happy to put that or anything you want in your contact information, any links to things at RxGames or whatever you like. You've helped us, and I like to help people to help us and bring knowledge to our community. So I want to thank you for your time. Didn't know it would go on this long. But like I said, we're a slightly more engaged community than a lot of what you might run into. So got some good questions today too. So once again, thank you, and we'll everybody have a great day.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you.
And I'll stop the YouTube. And end. Yeah, okay. I'm serious, Lynn, about any way that we can help you. Would be